Off the Grid is the newly launched third-person battle royale from a studio called Gunzilla Games. This public launch occurred on October 9th, with concurrent releases on the Epic Game Store, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X. Prior to this, the game had only been available during private playtest sessions, with any sharing of footage prohibited due to a strict NDA. Primarily known for their significant presence in Instagram and Facebook ads, as well as their recent sponsoring of famous streamers, Off the Grid is arguably the most mainstream Web3 or crypto game made to date. I was originally planning on reviewing this game at a later point, but since I was getting an overwhelming amount of requests, I set aside some time this past week to play it while it was still fresh. Instead of a more extensive deep dive like I usually do, this video will serve as a surface-level introduction to Off the Grid. It will also include my first impressions and thoughts after logging around 15 hours of playtime. Let's begin. Off the Grid was first teased back in 2021 with an announcement that director Neill Blomkamp would serve as Chief Visionary Officer. Primarily known for his feature films, including District 9 and Elysium, fans of Blomkamp may also be aware of his long-standing love for video games. Personally, I am a big fan of most of his work, with District 9 being among my favorite movies of all time. Needless to say, I was quite intrigued when it was announced that he'd be working on an upcoming video game. Promotional material released for Off the Grid depicted its distinct and gritty world, featuring cybernetically enhanced combatants dueling to the death in a hyper-commercialized blood sport. Blomkamp's involvement was unmistakable, and the game appeared to be visually and thematically impressive. With a formal announcement for Off the Grid arriving in 2022, gamers around the world were shocked to hear that the title would prominently feature NFT and cryptocurrency integration. In a statement from Gunzilla Games' CEO, the reason for this was one we've heard hundreds of times before, bringing true ownership to gamers. Because apparently, without NFTs, you don't technically own your in-game items, because you can't sell them or trade them freely. The usual talking points. This news drew an expected amount of controversy, as it was around this same time that the first wave of NFT games started to hit the market. In a preemptive defense, Gunzilla clarified that all NFTs and crypto aspects would be entirely optional in Off the Grid, with, quote, no progression or any game features behind a monetized paywall. According to Crunchbase.com, Gunzilla would raise over $100 million in venture capital funding to produce Off the Grid, immediately placing the game in AAA territory. However, with Gunzilla Games being a brand new studio, it was tough to know what to expect. When even the big guys can't keep their games afloat for longer than a year, it's even more unlikely for an unknown to stand any chance in this competitive market. With the cryptocurrency and heavy venture capital funding in mind, many had been skeptical of the game since day one, but with the recent early access launch, we no longer need to speculate. This launch was supported by the mass sponsorship of some of the internet's biggest live streamers. Shroud, Ninja, and even Dr. Disrespect were included in these promotional efforts. Anyway, as an early access game, it's important to note that Off the Grid is not a finished product. However, that doesn't make it immune to criticism, especially considering the fact that the game is currently monetized via an optional monthly subscription. I'm bringing this defense up right away because I need to talk about the game's most prominent and recurring issue. It runs horribly. Off the Grid is without a doubt one of, if not the most unoptimized games to release this year. You'd be lucky to get a solid 60 frames per second on top-of-the-line hardware. I'll talk about this plenty throughout the review, but I wanted to mention it right away since it'll be abundantly clear while watching my gameplay footage. My computer specs are as follows: a 7900 XTX GPU, an overclocked Ryzen 7 5800X, and 128 GB of RAM. On the high-quality preset, I cannot sustain more than 45 frames per second at any given moment. And in more intense firefights, it will often dip into the 30s and below. The constantly jittering frame rate mixed in with frequent stutters results in an unplayable disaster, which is a shame because the game is visually impressive. But even on the lowest settings, with ultra performance FSR enabled, we're still far from acceptable, with constant drops below 60 during moments of action. At this time, the only way to viably play Off the Grid on a PC is by editing a config file and disabling the game's lighting effects. This isn't particularly difficult to do, but it's worth mentioning. Making this edit allowed me to sustain a solid 70 FPS at pretty much all times. It's not great, but it's enough to be able to enjoy the game without complaining about the performance the entire time. Your mileage may vary though. I have a computer far more powerful than most people. Off the Grid is a third-person battle royale, taking place in a near-future world full of dark themes, cybernetic technology, and crass humor. In this world, there is a real-life battle royale competition, and you are the newest contestant. To join, you'll have to have your human limbs amputated and replaced with mechanical ones. better make sure not to make a fool of yourself, because the whole world is watching, live on television. The world building, atmosphere, and overall aesthetics of the game are fantastic. Blomkamp's influence is obvious, from the concept to the dialogue and even down to the color grading. The documentary-style presentation is something you don't really see in video games, and I'm a fan of it. I especially like the loading screen cutscenes, which feature video demonstrations of real-life soldiers using the game's iconic cybernetic limbs. These cybernetic limbs are where Off the Grid attempts to set itself apart from the 1,000 other Battle Royale games. As you traverse the arena and open boxes, you'll find upgraded limbs alongside the usual variety of guns and healing items. When limbs are equipped, your character gains new active abilities. There's a decent bit of variety here, both offensive and defensive. Enhance your mobility through extended jumps and super-powered sprints. Paralyze or scout your enemies by launching a drone from your arm. Grapple and pull yourself to new heights, or deploy a bullet-blocking shield. At any time, you can equip up to 3 limbs, 1 for each arm and 1 for your legs. Off the Grid is a heavily movement-based game, with your most powerful tool being your jetpack. This works similar to the parachute in Call of Duty Warzone, except you can deploy it while you're only a few feet off the ground. When your jetpack is active, you can alter the pitch and roll of your flight, building up speed and weaving through the highly vertical map. It takes a bit of getting used to, but when mastered, you're really able to take advantage of momentum and get around the map quickly. It's especially fun dodging in and out of combat looking for a better position, something you'll need to focus on if you want any sort of success in this game. Currently, there is only one available game mode, Extraction Royale. This is a bit of a misnomer, as it doesn't really function like you might think when you hear the word extraction. Instead, it's just a traditional battle royale, where 20 teams of 3 fight to be the last standing in an ever-shrinking safe zone. Extraction, in this case, refers to what are called hexes, which are really just loot boxes. These can contain weapons and attachments, as well as other cosmetic items. Hexes are found randomly in-game, and whenever you're holding one, your general location will be shown on the map for all to see. If you can survive long enough to reach a hextractor, you can begin the sequence and secure your loot. Defend it until the progress bar fills, and your whole team will receive a hex, regardless of whether you win the match or not. These hexes, and the items within, are the primary drivers of Off the Grid's in-game economy, which I'll talk about later. But other than that, it's everything you're familiar with in the Battle Royale genre, plus a cyberpunk twist. Off the Grid is a visually impressive game, in theory. But in reality, if you're playing the game in any serious fashion, you'll have to make it look like PUBG Mobile. The setting of the world is a dry, mostly brown cityscape, dotted with occasional foliage and billboard advertisements. The texture work is great, and everything has the appropriate amount of rust, grime, and graffiti. It all feels like a cohesive world built from the ground up for the game, and it just simply looks good. My praise extends to the game's cutscenes as well. They're well-paced, visually dense, and the animation and acting is great. But I don't really think anyone is arguing otherwise, because Off the Grid is objectively a good-looking game. It's just a shame that we don't actually get to enjoy any of the work while we're playing the game, unless all you want to do is stand still and count the pixels on a wall. Despite the frame rate issues and my need to play on piss-low graphics settings, overall clarity is great. And let's be honest for a moment here, if you're playing a Battle Royale game, or any fast-paced shooter for that matter, you're probably not playing on the highest graphics settings even if you have the specs for it. Now, it's not an excuse for the poor performance, but even if they manage to fix it, most people are still never going to see the visuals at their best. Regardless, the environment is structured and colored so that the most important aspects always stand out, independent of your graphics settings. Loot boxes, zip lines, and revive stations are adorned with bright reds, yellows, and greens, ensuring you can always spot them against the mostly beige and gray world. The simple color scheme of the backdrop also makes spotting enemies a whole lot easier, something that's tremendously important with this game's fast pace. To sum up my impressions of Off the Grid's visuals, it's a great looking game that you'll be forced to play on low settings, regardless of your hardware. This alone is enough to dissuade many players, and I don't really blame them. If you're not running top-of-the-line hardware, you're not going to have a good time. The fast-paced gameplay is impossible to keep up with when you can't maintain a consistent frame rate. It's kind of inexcusable, if you ask me, to see it run this poorly after they've been testing for months, but hey, it's early access, right? But perhaps more important than the visuals, we have the audio. Outside of the main gameplay, the music and cutscene audio are both spot on. The game's main orchestral theme, while a bit generic, has a distinct melody that I found to be pretty catchy. But with regards to the in-game audio, we've got a bit of a different story, unfortunately.
detected.
It's an audio overload. Footsteps, gunfire, the announcer constantly swearing in your ear, your character talking, mechanical whirring, and general ambient sounds. There's a lot going on. It all just blends together, and you end up hardly being able to focus on anything at all. Footstep audio isn't terrible, but it's not great either, and it's especially hard to tell if someone is above you or below. Additionally, the feedback when dealing and taking damage is essentially non-existent. I can't even count the amount of times I was shot down to a sliver of health before even realizing I had been hit at all. The audio overload is only made worse by this incessant announcer. Everything this guy says is either a vulgar insult or unnecessarily long and unfunny.
Hostile hex extraction in Stork City. Go steal it for yourselves, you incompetent panty turds. I heard you might be interested in a little tactical and flip the big red switch in Little Kiev and are extracting the hex right now.
I get that it's part of the theme, but it's just annoying after a point. It would be great if they added an option to remove this guy entirely, substituting in a more neutral and straightforward voice. I want to have an announcer, I need to know what's happening, but I just hate this one, and currently the only way to get rid of him is to disable the announcements entirely. But in general, audio is one of the most difficult things to balance when it comes to game design, so I can understand it being subpar at this point. They better be keeping a close eye on this, and focus on refining it sooner rather than later. But now for the meat of the review. What did I think of the gameplay? It's not groundbreaking, nor is it revolutionary. It's a third-person shooter battle royale with advanced movement, a dime a dozen. But I gotta admit, it feels pretty good, and I had fun playing it. Gunplay is rather neutral. It's easy to aim, and recoil isn't really much of a problem. The skill expression comes more from positioning and getting the jump on your enemies rather than aiming well. Time to kill is fast, especially when in close range. If someone gets the jump on you from above, you're pretty much always dead. Luckily, getting the advantage is simple, thanks to the prevalence of zip lines and cybernetic limbs to help you get airborne. It's a satisfying playstyle, especially when you master it, but don't expect that to come quickly. The skill ceiling is quite high, and you'll easily spend your first 5 hours of gameplay without getting a single kill. But when it finally clicks, it actually feels great. I have no major complaints regarding either the movement or the gunplay, aside from the comical lack of feedback when getting hit. None of the weapons appear to be blatantly overpowered, but I can't say the same for the cybernetic limbs. The movement enhancing ones, such as the super sprint or the high jump, are must-haves, but many of the offensive ones are quite useless. The short range and sluggish animations of the abilities will more commonly result in your death rather than your target's. However, the paralyzer ability is just ridiculous. There's no counterplay. If you get hit, you're good as dead. But since this is a battle royale, you might not always get the best items, and you're forced to use whatever you find on the ground, right? Not quite. Off the Grid features a loadout system, similar to the one in Call of Duty Warzone. As you loot chests and complete missions during the match, you'll gain credits. These are used to revive your teammates, as well as calling in the loadouts. These loadouts are custom built by you. You can assemble them using the weapons that you've collected from hexes or purchased on the marketplace. This is where things get controversial. Off the Grid is a crypto game. I've been playing and reviewing these curious creations for quite a while now, and for the most part, they suck. Because of this, they're not very popular, with mainstream audiences turned off by their excessive monetization and predatory structure. But this one's gonna be different, as they always say. Instead of marketing themselves as a play-to-earn game, Off the Grid states that they decided to use the blockchain to empower players with true digital ownership. No longer will your in-game items just be made-up numbers in a database somewhere. Now, they're cryptographically verified to be certifiably unique made-up numbers in a database stored in multiple places. To you as the player, this doesn't really make any difference, especially because the main blockchain aspects of the game aren't yet enabled. Because of this, there's no point in looking too far into this, since it's all subject to change. But the core concept probably won't change, so I can at least summarize that. We could spend all day arguing whether or not they need to use the blockchain to do what they're doing, so instead of that, we're just going to comment on the reality of the situation. All items extracted from the hexes in-game are NFTs. This means that every gun and cosmetic you can equip is verifiably scarce, with no two items having the same serial number. Some are more rare than others, and when the supply of available items runs out, no more will ever exist. As you play the game and complete missions, you earn guns tokens. Currently, these exist only on a test blockchain, and there's no way to exchange them for real money. Additionally, they've said that they'll wipe everyone's balance when the game launches, so it truly is just normal in-game currency right now. These tokens are used used to open the hexes, which contain NFT items. These items can either be gameplay altering, such as new weapons and attachments, or purely cosmetic, like new hairstyles or clothes. Every one of these items can be sold on the in-game marketplace, where the primary currency is the guns token. In the future, you'll be able to exchange these guns tokens for real money, but not right now. But why would you even want to buy a weapon? Is the game pay to win? When you purchase or loot a weapon from a hex, it can come in different rarities. The more rare and expensive weapons have more attachment slots. Attachments include increased magazine sizes, adding a scope, or improving recoil, among other things. Additionally, you can purchase higher rarity cybernetic limbs, with the more expensive limbs having more charges and a lower cooldown. You can mix and match any combination of NFT items to build the ultimate loadout, which you can call in during any match to use in battle. So it sounds like it's pay to win. Not really, but at the same time, everyone isn't on the same level playing field. The rarest items can always be found in the random loot during a match, so it's not like the only way you can get the epic sniper rifle is by buying the NFT, but sometimes you just get unlucky and don't find any good loot. This is where you'd have to use your credits and call in the loadout. However, the rarer the items in your loadout, the more credits they cost to call in. Therefore, you already have to be doing pretty well in the match before you can even call in the loadout in the first place. This all sounds pretty balanced, but in reality, it's actually easy to get quite a lot of credits, as long as you're good at getting kills. In most matches, you usually get more than you could ever spend, especially during the late game when there's only a few teams left. Because of this, the players with the clapped out loadouts will reliably get to use them, widening the gap between those with and without NFTs. The closest comparison would again be Call of Duty Warzone. In that game, the weapons and attachments for the player loadouts are locked behind the massive time sink that is grinding weapon XP. Also, some weapons are just locked behind DLC, so you can't even get them no matter how much you grind. Do people say that Warzone is a pay-to-win game? I actually have no idea. I haven't played that game in forever, so maybe someone can answer the question in the comments. But anyway, since you aren't guns just for playing the game, you can always buy any weapon you want on the marketplace. But just because you can doesn't mean you will. The rate at which you currently earn guns tokens is pitiful, often getting less than 1 per game. Considering that most weapons cost around 50 or so guns tokens, you'll need to grind quite a bit to build a full loadout. But what if you get a rare gun in a hex? Then you can just sell it and fund your gameplay for months, right? No. In order to sell something on the marketplace, you must subscribe to the OTG Pro membership, which costs $12 per month. Aside from being able to sell things on the marketplace, you also get a 500% increase to the amount of guns earned, as well as access to the current Battle Pass. This subscription is the only way you can participate in the Battle Pass, as there is no way to get it otherwise. You can try the subscription for free for 3 days, but you'll need to link a credit card so they can auto-charge you when the trial ends. The subscription is handled through a third-party payment processor called Xsolla, and they're not that great. I subscribed to the free trial to test the features, and when I went to cancel it, I needed to reach out to Xsolla customer support. Definitely annoying, but I'm not sure if this problem was unique to me or not. In general, I'm not really a fan of subscription models in games, especially as I've gotten older and have less time to dedicate to gaming. Couple this with the slow rate at which Battle Pass experience accrues, and you've got a game that ends up demanding quite a bit of your time. In the future, you'll be able to pay for your subscription with guns tokens, but at least with their current plans, you still need to link a credit card to do this. If you don't have enough guns when your subscription is due, your credit card will be charged. While technically this subscription isn't required, its existence in general does affect how the game functions. Since pro members get 5 times as much currency, it's caused marketplace prices to inflate dramatically, pricing out most of the free players. But if they just let anyone sell items for free, then they'd have the opposite problem, where bots and hackers just flood the market with dirt cheap items. And this is all happening right now before the coins even have any real world value. I can imagine it would only get worse when that's implemented. We see these problems all the time with crypto games. The economy is either borderline worthless or ridiculously inflated. Balancing this will be a constant struggle, especially when the tokens have a direct impact on the game. If token prices fall too much, the investors will get upset and the game's funding will suffer. But if they cater too much to investors, making the coin very expensive, it'll ruin the experience of the players. It's a problem that the developers have created for themselves, and I'm not convinced that it brings enough benefits to justify the struggles. As far as the player experience with the blockchain goes so far, it's really nothing but a hassle. I experienced many issues where my items were stuck validating on the blockchain, leaving them in a sort of limbo state. I actually have some items that simply never validated, even a week later. While the items are validating, you can't sell them, but you can still use them in the game. This all makes me wonder, why exactly are we using the blockchain again? So I can own my items? But do I really own them if I have to pay to sell them? As I mentioned before, the presence of the blockchain economy is absolutely going to attract hackers or exploiters. Despite the fact that all of the guns tokens earned so far will be reset at launch, the PC version of the game is already full of hackers. I played well over 20 matches of Off the Grid, and during my time, I encountered hackers in at least 5 of my matches. These are some of the most obvious hackers I have ever seen in any game, and they're able to kill the entire lobby within seconds of the match starting. They are making no attempt to hide it, and they even go as far as to advertise their cheat websites in their usernames. Unfortunately, cheaters are prevalent in just about every free-to-play game nowadays, but with there being a significant real money incentive to play Off the Grid, having strong anti-cheat is absolutely critical. But I have little faith that they'll be able to outsmart these hackers, considering that massive companies like Riot, Activision, and Valve can't stop them either. At least those games don't have real money economies, or if they do, the developers have the power to roll back and reverse fraudulent transactions. But with the blockchain, the entire purpose is that it's immutable. Not even the developers can take your items away. They've got a huge problem on their hands, and I'm curious to see how they solve it without compromising the integrity of the blockchain, because as soon as they start rolling back transactions, banning hackers, and taking their items, all of the touted benefits of blockchain disappear. The fact that you don't legally own your in-game items has nothing to do with technology. The developers can still do whatever they want, even though it's on the blockchain, because they control the game and how it interprets the NFTs. It's also not really the best business model to allow players to buy and sell items from each other, since you just created your own competition. So in the case of Off the Grid, I look at their choice of using blockchain as more of a gimmick, or maybe an experiment. Yes, you can do everything they're doing and create an arguably better user experience without the blockchain, just like you could choose to build an MMO in Game Maker. Should you do that? Probably not. Are you making your job more difficult? Yes. Will it be cool if you manage to pull it off? Yeah, definitely. But since all of the guns tokens live on a test network at this time, and since there's no way to cash out your coins, Off the Grid is by definition not a crypto game, at least yet. I'm really interested to see how things turn out in the future, especially when it comes to wrangling the hackers. But until that day comes, I'm not so sure that I'll be adding Off the Grid to my regular gaming rotation. Off the Grid is easily the best crypto game I've ever played. It's clearly made by people who actually play video games, and I can tell that they're passionate about making a good product. However, the poor performance, abundance of hackers, and my general fatigue for the Battle Royale genre is going to keep me from returning to the game in the near future. They have plans to implement a more campaign-focused game mode, with story missions that you can progress and complete during the BR matches. To me, this is a lot more appealing. During most of my matches, I wasn't really focused on getting first place, mostly because I would just get frustrated when I died to lag or hackers. Instead, I was more interested in trying to collect and extract the hexes, or hunting down other teams and stealing their hexes. Once they add the story missions, I imagine you'd have a subset of players in every match that is not at all focused on winning, making them unafraid to play overly aggressive. But with the current state of the game, I have no interest in playing it for fun in my free time. While I was able to get a solid frame rate after modifying the config files, it still suffers from occasional stutters and lag spikes during heavy combat. When the game works, it's fun, but as soon as you die because your frame rate randomly plummeted, it's enough to make you rage quit. While I was writing this review, they pushed a patch to the game that was supposed to improve performance, but I found that it didn't make any improvements at all. In fact, it seems to run even worse than it did before, and many players in the game's Discord server report the same. Coupled with the rampant hacking, the overall difficulty and sweaty gameplay, and the fact that I've already got well over 1,000 hours in Fortnite, Warzone, and Apex Legends combined, I'm just not interested in what Off the Grid has to offer right now. Nothing about the gameplay is really innovative. It's just a combination of things we've seen in other battle royales. Even the limb system isn't that unique. Spellbreak had something similar with their gauntlet system. Does anyone remember what happened to that game? Sadly, this is a very saturated genre, and you really need to set yourself apart if you want to be successful. So even if they fix the optimization, ban all of the hackers, and the marketplace ends up working perfectly, will Off the Grid really bring crypto gaming to the mainstream? I don't know about the mainstream, but it will definitely expose it to a wider audience than ever before. This is great for me, since it means I'll have an endless amount of games to cover in the future. In all seriousness though, I started this channel with the goal of playing and reviewing every crypto game from the perspective of a gamer who doesn't care about crypto. Along the way, we found that almost every single one of these games are horrendous. However, most of the time, they're already bad before we even get to the crypto parts. This is one of the few times we've seen a game that has a solid core before adding the crypto. In general, I don't envy the developers of this game, or any crypto game for that matter. By going down this route, they've set themselves up not only for public backlash and criticism, but difficulties and problems that no other games have to worry about. Is this decision worth it? Will Off the Grid truly empower players with ownership they've been lacking for years? Does anyone even care about that? I just want to play a game that's fun, and when I'm bored, I'll move on and play a different game. I don't care about selling my items or being rewarded monetarily for my time spent playing. I already work hard enough at my real job. The last thing I want to do is make my favorite pastime feel like a chore. While I probably will not be playing Off the Grid too much, if at all, I will be closely following its development. I absolutely plan on returning to the game sometime next year, with a full-length video breaking down the game in extreme detail like I usually do. Anyway, you asked, and that's what I had to say about Off the Grid. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've tried the game yourself. Here are a few questions to get the discussion started. What do you think of the subscription model and marketplace? Is the poor optimization excused by the early access label? Do you think that they could ever stop the hackers? And most importantly, if every issue I highlighted gets resolved, would you play this game? I'm John, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.